On September 12th, 2025, astronomers caught sight of something that shook their confidence in how the universe behaves. From the darkness of interstellar space, a colossal object blazed inward with a tail stretching across the sky 5 times the width of a full moon. It was so enormous that even backyard astronomers could pick it out easily. Within hours, confirmations poured in from observatories across the world. This was no ordinary comet. It was something larger, brighter, and stranger than any object ever recorded. The official designation, C2025R2, was quickly replaced by a simpler nickname, Swan. Yet it wasn't just the size or brightness that stunned the scientific community. It was the timing. Another object, the already notorious 3I/ATLAS, was inbound as well, racing toward the sun from the opposite side of the sky. Both were on track to reach their closest approach to the sun within the same 10-day window, both hidden by the sun's glare at the critical moment, and both displaying anomalies that simply defied the laws of nature. For researchers used to rare coincidences, this double entry wasn't chance. The odds were so small that some quietly stopped calling it coincidence and began using a different word, mission. If one interstellar object was strange enough, the arrival of a second, this one 100 times larger, targeting the same solar corridor suggested something else entirely. The data kept coming in, and with each update the picture became more unsettling. Swan's most striking feature wasn't just its unprecedented scale, but its behavior. Comets scatter light in predictable patterns, reflecting sunlight off ice and dust. Swan, however, showed reflective signatures of nickel and cobalt, metals humans use to forge durable alloys and shield against corrosion. Some researchers began calling it the Fortress because while normal comets crumble under solar stress, this one held steady, armored, maintaining a brightness curve that ice and dust could never explain. Its vast tail did not behave like chaotic vapor either. It pulsed with subtle, rhythmic changes, almost like controlled microthrusts guiding its path. One scientist compared it to a skyscraper-sized tank drifting through space, cloaked in a shimmering halo that might not be gas at all, but an electromagnetic shield deflecting solar wind. Timing added another layer of unease. While Swan loomed like a fortress, its smaller counterpart, 3I/ATLAS, behaved like a drone. It darted and shifted, showing bursts of acceleration and sudden tail color changes no natural process could replicate. Together, they didn't look like random visitors, but pieces of a single puzzle. Two parts of a system converging on the sun at the same time, hidden from view during the days when their true purpose might unfold. When astronomers plotted their arrival vectors on a star map, something extraordinary emerged. Swan was coming from Aquarius, Atlas from Sagittarius, two origins separated by more than a quarter of the entire celestial sphere. Despite such radically different approach angles, both crossed into the inner solar system at almost the same solar distance, reaching perihelion within 3 days of each other. Statistically, that kind of synchrony is impossible. Random comets scatter their arrivals across decades or centuries, but never like this. Then came the blackout. Between October 8th and October 18th, the sun's glare blinded telescopes, creating a window where neither Swan nor Atlas could be observed directly. Their closest approach to the sun and to each other happened at the exact moment Earth's instruments were blinded. To many scientists, this looked less like coincidence and more like coordination, as if their paths were engineered to meet under solar cover, two anomalies arriving together, timing their rendezvous to the one place and time we cannot watch. In orbital dynamics, this is called a corridor, a narrow window of space and time where objects align in a way that defies randomness. This corridor forced the scientific community to face a question it had long avoided. What if these objects weren't just passing through, but converging for a purpose? Orbital mechanics raised questions, but the energy data raised alarms. Atlas had already shocked researchers with its bursts of acceleration that mimicked thruster-like maneuvers, each pulse requiring the output of 10 nuclear power plants. Swan made that look trivial. Its implied energy levels were on the order of 10,000 gigawatts, more than Earth's entire power grid. No natural comet nucleus can produce such raw output. The reflective metals, the persistent halo, and the rhythmic pulses suggested not outgassing but control, like a machine using plasma bursts to steer itself. The idea of engineered propulsion, once dismissed as science fiction, began circulating among astronomers who could no longer ignore the numbers. Even the timing of the pulses seemed deliberate, regular enough to resemble a signal, patterned enough to hint at communication, and so consistent that some started calling Swan not a fortress, but a beacon. If Atlas was a drone maneuvering and adjusting, then Swan might be the mothership, a colossal structure designed to survive millennia in space, arriving now not by chance but by cycle. With an orbital period of more than 22,000 years, Swan could have passed this way long before recorded history, perhaps during the last ice age, leaving traces our ancestors remembered as myths, carvings, or warnings. And now it was back, aligned once more with another anomaly, as if to remind humanity it is not the only intelligence shaping the sky. Just as curiosity reached its peak, silence descended. NASA, ESA, and other agencies quietly restricted data releases, suspending high-resolution imaging and radar tracking during the exact days the two objects were closest to the sun. Officially, this was explained as solar conjunction downtime, a standard safety measure. But behind-the-scenes leaks revealed explicit orders: avoid public statements, deny requests for raw data, reroute proposals for alternative observations. The blackout wasn't just natural, it was enforced. Yet the silence only amplified the voices of independent astronomers who rallied across forums and private networks to keep their telescopes pointed at the sky. Groups like the Abaro Tracker Collective in Spain and Bill Gates' Distributed Telescope Network began sharing data, desperate to capture even fragments of information that governments refused to release. This grassroots resistance fueled speculation that something extraordinary was happening behind the curtain, something agencies did not want the public to see. Because if Swan and Atlas were converging for a purpose, then the real question wasn't what they were, but why they were here now. And if their meeting was engineered, then humanity had already stumbled into the middle of a mission it was never meant to witness. As telescopes tracked 3 I/ATLAS, its tail's behavior became even stranger. Over a span of weeks, 3 sudden accelerations were recorded. Each one was sharp and unexpected, spaced like clockwork, and each coincided with a color shift in the tail. One moment the glow tilted red, the next it shifted to neutral, then snapped back again, as if an unseen mechanism were adjusting its propulsion. Natural outgassing from comets happens gradually, driven by the sun's heat. What Atlas displayed was abrupt, rhythmic, controlled. Energy estimates suggested the power required for each thrust was equivalent to 10 nuclear plants working at full capacity. For a chunk of ice and dust, that should have been impossible. For a machine, it would make sense. Meanwhile, Swan mirrored this behavior at an even larger scale. Its gigantic tail pulsed with microbursts that nudged it subtly, like course corrections made with precision. Both objects, one small and agile, the other vast and unstoppable, seemed to be maneuvering within the solar system, not as wanderers but as participants in a plan. The chilling part was that their thrusts weren't random, they appeared synchronized. Orbital dynamics had always been the one thing astronomers could trust to reveal truth, but here the truth was unsettling. Swan and Atlas, though arriving from completely different directions in the galaxy, lined up to occupy the same narrow corridor of space and time. Their perihelion points, those closest brushes with the sun, ended up only 50 million kilometers apart, a smaller distance than the gap between Earth and Mars. Their timings were within 3 days. And all of this unfolded during the exact solar blackout window when Earth-based telescopes were blinded by glare. For comet watchers used to centuries of data, this was unprecedented. Normally, interstellar visitors appear sporadically, sometimes decades apart, their orbits scattered across time and space. But here were 2 anomalies intersecting the same corridor in synchrony, as if guided by a schedule, a clock ticking on a scale beyond human comprehension. It was as though the sun wasn't just a gravitational center, but a rendezvous point, a meeting hub for missions humanity was only beginning to notice. When chance breaks down, design rises as the only explanation left. Even the most cautious voices in astronomy began to admit this looks engineered. When scientists compared the energy outputs of the 2 objects, disbelief turned to dread. Atlas, with its sudden thrusts, radiated bursts equal to 10 gigawatts, enough to power major cities. But Swan's sustained luminosity implied an energy output of 10,000 gigawatts, more than the entire Earth generates. That scale of energy cannot be reconciled with natural processes. Comets sublimate ice. Asteroids reflect sunlight. But nothing sustains such stable, immense power without collapsing. Theories began to swirl. Was Swan harvesting solar energy, using the sun itself as a colossal recharge station? Was its enormous metallic hull designed to capture radiation and convert it into propulsion? Some fringe researchers argued it wasn't a comet at all, but a fortress-like construct, its vast glowing tail a byproduct of plasma shielding. The most haunting possibility was that its energy wasn't for travel at all, but for communication. A beacon broadcasting not to Earth, but to somewhere far beyond, its pulsing emissions carrying data across the void. If that was true, then Swan wasn't just visiting, it was reporting, and humanity was not the intended audience. As both objects closed in on perihelion, the institutions people relied on for truth began to fall silent. NASA, ESA, and ISRO all curtailed updates, restricted live data, and denied requests for Webb's raw observations. Information that had once been public suddenly became classified. When pressed, officials cited internal review and conjunction downtime, but behind closed doors, astronomers whispered about explicit orders to remain quiet. Freedom of information requests returned heavily redacted documents. Leaks from observatory staff suggested researchers had been reassigned, teams dissolved, and telescope feeds restricted. This wasn't the normal hush of cautious science. It was a blackout of intent. At the same time, independent astronomers filled the void, rallying networks of backyard telescopes, repurposed satellites, and encrypted data channels to track what governments refused to share. The more silence from the top, the louder the whispers grew. Something extraordinary was happening, something so paradigm-shifting that silence had become a form of control. Because when discoveries threaten not just science, but power, the truth is never denied. It is hidden. And in this case, that silence might be the most terrifying evidence of all. As Swan and Atlas advanced toward their closest approach, scientists began revisiting ancient records, not out of desperation, but because Swan's orbital period suggested something staggering. Every 22,554 years, this object returned. That meant its last appearance lined up almost perfectly with the end of the last ice age. Archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey suddenly gained new relevance, because among its ancient stone carvings were depictions of celestial events, spirals, and symbols that some researchers believe could represent long-period comets blazing across prehistoric skies. Humanity's earliest civilizations might have witnessed a glowing fortress the size of a small world dominating the heavens, leaving impressions so powerful they became myths etched into stone for generations. Could Swan have been here before, recorded as warnings, prophecies, or religious iconography? If this cycle had been repeating for tens of thousands of years, then perhaps what humanity was now seeing wasn't just astronomy, but the return of something that had shaped the sky long before civilization even existed. Behind the polished press releases and cautious scientific statements, quiet operations were unfolding in the shadows. Sources whispered of a classified probe launched from a covert orbital platform, a mission designed to test Swan directly. The probe carried advanced particle scanners built to pierce through the blinding tail and capture high-resolution structural data. But it never reached its destination. Just over 1,000,000 kilometers from Swan, its signal was abruptly cut. At first, analysts assumed a system fault, but the final image told a different story, a reflection, a fractal echo of the probe itself, as if Swan had scanned it back in perfect mimicry. Moments later, the feed collapsed into silence. Engineers analyzing the data described it as an energy wall, a lattice-like field similar to a Faraday cage designed not only to shield, but to repel intrusions. Swan wasn't merely passing through, it was defended, actively monitoring and countering anything that got too close. The implications were chilling. Not only was it enormous, it was aware. Spectroscopic data from the James Webb Telescope added another layer of mystery. Instead of the usual mix of ice, dust, and silicates expected from comets, Swan's spectrum revealed traces of complex organic molecules, polyaromatic hydrocarbons so refined and structured that some scientists argued they looked engineered. These molecules are the building blocks of life, precursors to amino acids, the very seeds from which biology can emerge. Unlike messy, chaotic mixes found in primitive comets, Swan's organics were pure, aligned, almost unnervingly perfect. Some began theorizing that Swan might not simply be a machine, but a carrier, a seed ship designed to transport and perhaps distribute life across star systems. If Atlas was a drone, agile and active, and Swan was a fortress, massive and shielded, together they could represent different stages of a far older mission: observation, protection, and perhaps colonization. And if that was true, then Earth's position in this story might not be incidental. Humanity could be the next step in a plan predating civilization by tens of thousands of years. As the blackout window deepened, Independent trackers noticed a detail that few dared to voice aloud. The trajectories of Atlas and Swan were not just converging by coincidence. They appeared to be aligning toward the same region of space, a corridor that brought them within proximity of each other near the Sun. For natural objects, such precision would be absurd. But here, the orbital dance looked intentional, like two ships arriving at a harbor for a rendezvous. Some theorists argued this could even be a refueling event, the Sun acting as an energy node where both objects recharge. The rhythmic pulses of both objects reinforced this unnerving narrative. Atlas's sudden accelerations required power outputs equivalent to multiple nuclear plants working simultaneously, while Swan's massive luminosity suggested a consistent 10,000 gigawatt output, far beyond any natural comet's capabilities. Swan's tail pulsed, not chaotically, but in deliberate bursts, like course corrections executed with unmatched precision. And while Atlas darted and adjusted like a drone, Swan moved with unstoppable momentum, armored against solar forces and able to maintain stability under conditions that would disintegrate a normal celestial object. The blackout imposed by the sun's glare only intensified the mystery. From October 8th to 18th, Earth-based instruments could not track the objects directly. NASA, ESA, and ISRO cited solar conjunction, downtime, and instrument safety as reasons for restricting observation, but independent astronomers suspected a coordinated effort to hide critical data. Freedom of Information requests returned redacted documents, and leaks suggested researchers were reassigned, telescope feeds limited, and observation teams dissolved. It was more than cautious science. It was control. Yet the silence only strengthened the resolve of independent observers who worked tirelessly with backyard telescopes, distributed satellite feeds, and encrypted data networks to track what governments refused to share. As observations continued, a pattern emerged in ATLAS's behavior. Over several weeks, 3 distinct accelerations occurred, each aligned with sudden tail color shifts. At one moment, the tail glowed red, then shifted to neutral, then snapped back. Such abrupt changes defy natural processes, which are gradual and dependent on solar heating. These sharp, rhythmic, and controlled bursts suggested intelligence, as if the object was actively manipulating its motion. Each thrust's energy output, equivalent to 10 nuclear power plants, was impossible for a mass of ice and dust, but consistent with controlled machinery. Swan's massive scale mirrored this behavior on an even grander level. Its enormous tail pulsed with microbursts that subtly adjusted its course. Together, Swan and Atlas were no longer wanderers of space. They were participants in a deliberate operation, maneuvering with purpose. The synchronization of these pulses, along with the precise convergence of their paths, suggested they were parts of a coordinated system, one vast and powerful, the other small and agile. The energy signatures were perhaps the most alarming element. Atlas's thruster-like bursts were already staggering, but Swan's continuous output dwarfed them all. No known natural phenomenon could produce 10,000 gigawatts of sustained power or maintain it in a stable, coherent manner. Theories began to shift. Some suggested Swan might be harnessing solar energy, converting it into propulsion. Others argued the metallic hull was a collector, transforming radiation into movement. A more audacious theory proposed that Swan's energy wasn't for motion at all, but for communication, a beacon transmitting information across the cosmos not intended for Earth. The possibility that Swan was an active intelligence monitoring and responding to approaching probes challenged every assumption humanity held about space. When a classified probe approached Swan, just over 1,000,000 kilometers away, its signal was abruptly cut. The last image appeared to be a mirror of the probe itself, as if Swan had scanned it and reflected it back. Then, the feed vanished. Engineers interpreted this as an energy field acting like a lattice or Faraday cage, blocking intrusion and possibly repelling interference. If correct, this meant Swan wasn't merely a passive object, but an aware entity capable of defense and monitoring. Analysis of Swan's spectral data added another layer of complexity. Instead of the typical mix of dust, ice, and silicates, Swan carried complex organic compounds arranged in highly structured forms. These molecules resembled the building blocks of life, suggesting the object could be a seed ship, engineered to transport biological precursors between star systems. Unlike natural comets, whose organics are often chaotic, Swan's compounds were pure and aligned. Some scientists speculated it might be intentionally distributing life, while ATLAS acted as an escort, a smaller, maneuverable element within the mission. Historical records offered eerie confirmation. Swan's 22,554-year orbital period suggested its last visit coincided with the end of the last ice age. Ancient carvings, spirals, and celestial symbols in places like Göbekli Tepe could be interpretations of Swan's earlier passage. Humans might have seen it as a blazing fortress in the sky, recording its presence in myths and sacred iconography. Perhaps what humanity had always considered divine or supernatural was a faint memory of an interstellar object passing through on a predictable cycle. Its return now, paired with ATLAS, might signal that this cycle is repeating, that humanity is once again in the path of something ancient and purposeful. Despite the official blackout, independent networks of astronomers persisted. Distributed telescopes and encrypted data channels revealed even subtle movements. The precision of Swan and Atlas's alignment, their synchronized pulses, and their energy outputs painted a picture of deliberate action. They were converging in a corridor near the sun, performing maneuvers consistent with guidance and intelligence, not random celestial drift. Some researchers suggested the sun itself acted as an energy node, a charging station where the two objects could coordinate. The implications for humanity were profound. If Swan was a fortress and beacon, and Atlas a drone, then together they represented the operational and exploratory phases of an ancient mission. Swan might monitor, protect, and communicate, while Atlas explored, observed, and perhaps collected data. Earth's position may be intentional, part of a system designed long before humans existed. Humanity might not be merely observing interstellar objects. It could be intersecting with an ancient mission whose purpose extends beyond comprehension. As Swan approached its closest point to the sun, its tail continued to pulse rhythmically. Each microburst of energy was measurable from Earth, indicating not random activity but controlled adjustments. Atlas's rapid maneuvers and color shifts suggested it was responding to Swan or some external parameters. The synchronization between them was undeniable. For decades, scientists had assumed intelligent life elsewhere would announce itself through overt signals. Swan and Atlas challenged this assumption. If Swan was a carrier of life or information, its communication wasn't directed at Earth. Humanity was merely an observer. Atlas acted like a drone, Swan like a command ship. Together, they formed a coherent system operating on a scale humanity was just beginning to grasp. The solar blackout remained a critical factor. The period when Earth could not observe their closest approach added an almost ritualistic element to their rendezvous. It was as if the mission required secrecy, the critical phase occurring unseen. When visibility returned, independent astronomers pieced together fragments of data, confirming that the two objects had maneuvered with incredible precision. Their perihelion points were only 50 million kilometers apart, their timing within days, their energy outputs impossible for natural phenomena. Swan's protective hull, rhythmic pulses, energy absorption, and the presence of complex organics all pointed to deliberate engineering. Atlas's agility and responsive bursts complemented this system. Together, they illustrated a mission of observation, defense, and perhaps the distribution of life. The ancient records and myths suggested humanity's ancestors may have witnessed Swan's prior visits, leaving traces in carvings and stories. Now, modern humanity faced the return of that mission, once again intersecting with Earth, once again hidden in part by the sun's glare, once again impossible to ignore. As this realization sank in, the question shifted from "what are these objects?" to "why now?" The precision, energy, and coordination suggested intention. Whether the purpose was communication, monitoring, seeding life, or something beyond comprehension, it was clear humanity had stumbled into the middle of a cycle that had been unfolding for tens of thousands of years. The cosmos was no longer random. Swan and Atlas were operating as components of an ancient, calculated system, their arrival revealing that Earth itself might be part of a broader plan. Even as the world watched through restricted feeds, independent astronomers pieced together a narrative that was both thrilling and terrifying. Swan wasn't just passing by, it was aware. Atlas wasn't just drifting, it was maneuvering. Together, they formed a synchronized operation, converging at the sun in a corridor of space and time that defied probability. The implications of intelligent intervention in the inner solar system were staggering. Energy levels, orbital precision, and structural behavior all suggested planning, design, and execution. Humanity was witnessing an event that spanned millennia, an operation perhaps intended to monitor, protect, or communicate on a scale beyond comprehension. The combination of ancient cycles, engineered behavior, extreme energy, and the apparent intelligence behind these objects left scientists grappling with the unimaginable. Swan, the fortress and potential carrier of life, returned after 22,000 years, accompanied by Atlas, the drone-like executor. Their coordinated movements, energy management, and protective measures suggested a mission in progress. Earth, knowingly or not, was part of the theater, observing a phenomenon that had been planned over epochs, executed across light years, and maintained with an intelligence that dwarfed human understanding. At this moment, humanity had a choice: observe, analyze, and prepare, or remain passive and risk being entirely unprepared for the ramifications. Swan and Atlas weren't merely celestial visitors. They were active participants in a mission that predated history. The meticulous design, timing, energy, and apparent intelligence pointed to a cosmos where random chance is only part of the story. There was intention, there was planning, there was a system that operated on a scale far beyond human comprehension. And as the solar glare faded and instruments regained sight, the evidence of their converging paths became undeniable. Swan had returned, armored, pulsing, transmitting. Atlas maneuvered, agile, responsive, perfectly aligned. Together, they were not accidents of astronomy. They were pieces of a coordinated operation, ancient in origin, enormous in scope, and utterly beyond anything humanity had imagined. For the first time, it was clear. The universe is not merely observed. Sometimes it observes back, with intelligence, purpose, and patience measured in tens of thousands of years. Humanity stood at the edge of understanding, watching as a fortress and a drone moved with precise intent, their mission unfolding in the glare of the sun, hidden yet visible, a cosmic operation that had returned after millennia, reminding Earth that it had always been part of a far larger story. As the world tried to process what was unfolding in the sky, questions multiplied faster than answers. Astronomers had long believed that interstellar visitors were rare, chaotic, and largely unremarkable in terms of intelligence or intent. Yet Swan and Atlas shattered that notion entirely. They weren't random, they were precise, they were deliberate. And the more researchers examined their movements, the clearer it became that the two objects operated on scales of planning, energy, and awareness that made even the most sophisticated human technology look primitive. Independent networks of observers noticed patterns that official institutions seemed unwilling to acknowledge. Tiny shifts in ATLAS's trajectory corresponded with microbursts of Swan's tail energy. It was as if the two objects were communicating, coordinating maneuvers across millions of kilometers of space. The alignment wasn't coincidental. The pulses from Swan were measured, almost rhythmic, suggesting an intention behind their frequency. Some scientists began tentatively to hypothesize that these signals might not be a communication with Earth at all, but a form of internal synchronization, a conversation between the fortress and its drone. The more these anomalies were recorded, the more impossible it became to interpret them as natural phenomena. Atlas's sudden bursts of acceleration, requiring energy outputs equivalent to multiple nuclear plants, were synchronized with changes in tail coloration that defied thermodynamic explanation. Swan, in contrast, displayed consistent brightness and reflective patterns that could only be described as engineered. Its metallic hull, possibly containing nickel and cobalt, reflected sunlight in a way that stabilized its trajectory. The tail, spanning a distance 5 times the width of the full moon, pulsed with a rhythm that suggested artificial guidance. As astronomers dug into the orbital history of Swan, they found evidence that this object had passed through the solar system long before humanity had developed writing. Its cycle, approximately 22,554 years, aligned eerily with major epochs of Earth's history. Each pass seemed to coincide with global changes or disasters recorded in myths and ancient structures. Could this interstellar traveler have influenced civilizations or served as a silent observer of humanity's progress? Ancient carvings at sites like Göbekli Tepe and other megalithic monuments hinted at patterns in the sky that match Swan's orbital path. Spirals, concentric circles, and elongated streaks in stone could represent comet tails, celestial beacons, or warning symbols left for those who could read them. Meanwhile, Earth-based scientists scrambled to capture whatever data they could before the sun's glare rendered their instruments blind. Amateur astronomers became crucial contributors, sharing raw observations and images across encrypted networks. In Spain, the Abero Tracker Collective coordinated dozens of backyard telescopes, while Bill Gates' distributed network in the United States shared real-time measurements of ATLAS's tail and acceleration. Every observation seemed to confirm a narrative too coherent to be accidental. Swan and ATLAS were moving in unison, operating as components of a larger system that exceeded human understanding. The mystery deepened when a classified probe attempted to approach Swan. Its mission was simple: gather high-resolution structural data, and analyze the reflective metallic hull. Yet just over 1 million kilometers from the target, the probe's feed was abruptly terminated. The last image recorded was peculiar. Swan appeared to have reflected the probe itself, as if mimicking its sensors, then silence. Engineers theorized that Swan had an energy shield, a lattice-like barrier similar to a Faraday cage, capable of both shielding itself and repelling any close approach. This discovery alone suggested something remarkable. Swan was not just a massive object moving through space. It was aware, monitoring, and capable of defensive action. As the blackout window began, when Earth-based instruments could not observe the closest approach, independent astronomers became humanity's only window into these celestial phenomena. They noticed Atlas adjusting its trajectory in response to Swan's microbursts, each pulse precisely timed. The two objects seemed to operate like a coordinated unit, a mothership and a drone, converging at a solar rendezvous point. Each maneuver, each energy spike, and each tail shift were synchronized with uncanny precision. The level of coordination suggested that these objects were following instructions, executing a plan set in motion long before humans existed. The energy levels involved were staggering. Atlas's sudden bursts were already enough to power entire cities. Swan's constant energy output, however, was nearly incomprehensible, exceeding 10,000 gigawatts, more than the entire human civilization produces at any moment. Natural comets, driven by sublimation and solar heating, could not maintain this level of stability or intensity. Some theorists speculated that Swan might be harnessing solar radiation as a power source, capturing it with its reflective metallic hull and converting it into controlled thrust. Others considered the possibility that its energy was designed to transmit information, not propel itself, serving as a cosmic beacon or data carrier. Spectroscopic data further complicated interpretations. Swan's chemical composition was unusual. Structured organic molecules resembling precursors to amino acids were detected, pure and highly aligned, suggesting engineering rather than random chemical formation. In contrast, typical cometary organics are messy, unstructured, and inconsistent. Some researchers proposed a daring hypothesis. Swan could be a seed ship, designed to carry the building blocks of life across star systems. Atlas, agile and maneuverable, might serve as a monitoring or data collection component, acting as an escort to ensure the fortress reached its target corridor safely. The implications for humanity were profound. If Swan and Atlas were components of a deliberate mission, Earth's presence in their path might be intentional. Humanity was not merely observing, it was intersecting with a cycle that had been planned for tens of thousands of years. The precise synchronization of their trajectories, their energy outputs, and the rhythm of their pulses indicated a level of intelligence that dwarfed human comprehension. These objects were operating according to a timetable set long before humans had emerged, executing a mission with intent, coordination, and design. The ancient records hinted at prior visits. Swan's last pass coincided with global changes at the end of the last ice age. Myths, carvings, and stone spirals may have recorded the object's presence. Perhaps humanity's ancestors witnessed Swan's previous arrivals, interpreting its glowing tail and fortress-like appearance as divine or supernatural events. And now, in 2025, Swan had returned, along with Atlas, performing a synchronized operation near the sun, hidden partially by its glare. The cycle was repeating, and humanity was again a witness, possibly an unintended one. The relationship between Swan and ATLAS became increasingly evident. While Swan maintained a massive, steady path, Atlas darted, adjusted, and responded to external factors. The two appeared to communicate across millions of kilometers, their behavior too coordinated to be explained by random celestial mechanics. The solar corridor where they converged, invisible to Earth for 10 days due to glare, was like a stage prepared for their operation. Every movement, pulse, and energy discharge seemed orchestrated to occur within that window. Independent observers could only watch fragments of this grand choreography, piecing together evidence of intention, coordination, and intelligence. The patterns observed raised urgent questions. Were these objects engaged in observation, monitoring, or communication? Was Earth simply a bystander, or was humanity a target or participant in their operation? The energy outputs, the timing, and the precise synchronization suggested a mission of extraordinary complexity, possibly spanning millennia. Swan's metallic hull and reflective properties implied defense and power generation. Atlas's drone-like agility suggested reconnaissance and environmental assessment. Together, they formed a system that was simultaneously protective, active, and possibly designed to influence or monitor life on Earth. The ancient orbital cycle suggested that Swan's mission was not random. Every 22,554 years it returned, often coinciding with transformative periods on Earth. These periods aligned with events recorded in myths, legends, and sacred texts. Could Swan have been silently observing human development or ensuring the delivery of organic materials to Earth? If the object carried complex organics, it could have played a role in seeding life or influencing planetary ecosystems. Atlas, executing rapid maneuvers and bursts, may have been an operational component, monitoring conditions, testing trajectories, or gathering data to support Swan's larger mission. As the blackout period ended and instruments regained sight, independent observations confirmed that Swan and Atlas had executed their maneuvers with extraordinary precision. Swan maintained its armored, luminous course, while Atlas darted, responding with microbursts of energy. Their perihelion points were only 50 million kilometers apart, their timing synchronized within days. The entire operation appeared intentional, as if following a script written by an intelligence far beyond humanity's understanding. The scale of this operation, the energy involved, and the deliberate synchronization suggested a purpose beyond mere passage through the solar system. As Swan and Atlas moved further into the inner solar system, independent astronomers continued to gather fragmented data, constructing models, and attempting to decode the object's behaviors. Every pulse, shift, and acceleration suggested synchronization. Every reflection, energy discharge, and orbital adjustment hinted at intelligence. Humanity was not just watching celestial objects, it was witnessing an operation executed across millennia involving planning, precision, and energy beyond comprehension. The scale was staggering, the intent undeniable, and the implications for life on Earth, and possibly the entire solar system, were unimaginable. The final question remained: what was humanity's role? Were humans merely observers, or was Earth the next step in a plan older than civilization itself? Swan and Atlas were not passing strangers. They were active participants in a mission, executing maneuvers, energy pulses, and communication protocols with precision. Every aspect of their behavior suggested design, intelligence, and intent. Humanity had always assumed that interstellar objects were random. Swan and ATLAS proved otherwise. The universe, it seemed, was not merely a backdrop for human activity. It was active, intelligent, and observing.